Now that F-16s are on the ground in the Ukraine, we can expect the war to take a dramatic and sudden shift in the direction of the Ukraine side. Zelensky is really talking this up, talking about actually it's not. I'm sorry. Sorry for being facetious there on something that's actually pretty important. But though F-16s are indeed on the ground, the situation is almost no change. It's not going to result in any change in the tactical battlefield and therefore the strategic outcome. Those things are already really kind of sealed. But that's not what a lot of people think. A lot of people in the West, especially the United States, have been thinking that these F-16s are going to provide some kind of game changer status for a long time. And I've got Colonel Tony Shaffer on today to help us explain why that's not the case. And always happy to have Tony back on the show today. Tony, welcome back to the show, first of all.
Oh, Danny, I always enjoy our conversations. Thanks for having me. And this is it's going to be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it is, because a lot of things are going on, and like usual, a lot in the West, they want to focus on certain things and they want to avoid other things at all costs, and then they just want to talk about, well, this is the event, the outcome we'd like, so we're just going to pretend that's reality, and we're just going to take it from there. That seems to be the primary school of thought of foreign policy in Washington these days, and I wonder if you see that any differently.
So the basis for U.S. foreign policy is aspirations, not actual facts. It's a very dangerous situation where essentially decisions are made, policies are created based on feelings. It's a very woke military, to use a term that I think is aptly used to describe a lot of the trends right now. So, for example, we've seen over the last 48 hours this, Iran's going to attack. I've been on the air saying they're not going to attack. I think the Israelis did some things which really shocked the imagination of the Iranians. The hitting of a target in Tehran incidental to a presidential inauguration, that like got their attention, and rightly so. I mean, that was a precision strike that I don't think the Iranians know how they did it, and it put them on their heels. So what my point is that if you look at that, someone at the White House should have said, yeah, that's kind of got them spooked. They're not going to do anything for a few days. Instead, we heard this, they're going to attack. And General Holt, Blade and I said this, yeah, they don't know anything. They're presuming that. And I think in many ways they wanted it because it would distract them from domestic issues. So to me, Danny, the hallmark of this administration, they always want to create conditions and circumstance that allow them to act politically domestically. It's all about political power. So that's why you see much of this. And then part two, regarding the reality is Donbass at this point is pretty much under the complete control of Russia. There's very little left that the Ukrainians have, and there are indicators that the actual number of Ukrainian fighting units is decreasing because people aren't enlisting. They're going out and kidnapping people. And then we go to the latest wonder weapon, the F-16. So the F-16's mission, Danny, is simply to be defensive. That was the agreement. It's there to actually help knock down drones and missiles that are being fired at Ukraine from Russia. But of course, the Ukrainians are already trying to figure out a way to use it offensively. Just within the last few days, I believe the Ukrainians did a small incursion into Kursk, where they attempted with armored vehicles to go in. I think they made it 100 meters or something completely insane. But the Ukrainians, I think, are desperate for attention. And I think they're going to take whatever resources they have and use them in such a way to create attention on the war. And they believe, I think Zelensky believes, the more attention on what they're doing, the more potential that they're going to get a larger conflict when NATO actually joins them. I think that's what his aspiration is. And I think if he doesn't get NATO in, he wants to have more resources provided to him, which I think the resources are about to dry up.
And you know what I think is funny, Gary? I'm going to ask you to throw something up there a little out of order with Jens Stoltenberg, because you said something there that I think is really noteworthy, that he wants to get, Zelensky wants to get NATO into it. Well, specifically speaking about the F-16s, we'll see that Stoltenberg here said a couple of times in the span of just a few seconds, either a Freudian slip or I don't know what he was trying to say, but watch him talk about F-16s and what it's going to mean for Ukraine.
The fact that they're now delivering F-16s, of course, it will create a future NATO, no, sorry, Ukrainian Air Force that will be NATO interoperable. NATO planes, NATO pilots, NATO trained pilots, and
Yeah, NATO Air Force. I mean, no, a Ukraine Air Force with NATO pilots. I mean, NATO trained pilots. I don't know if he was a slip of the tongue there or what, but that's certainly what Zelensky's wanting, to have NATO pilots and NATO Air Force on his side.
Well, I think that the issue with Stoltenberg is he let the cat out of the bag. I think those are NATO pilots, Danny. I don't think they're Ukrainian. I'm just saying, it's like, yeah, you're not gonna be able to train. I just think that the whole thing is a fraud. I think that at this point in time, hold on, I got to adjust my microphone. Apparently, something happened over there, Gary. That'll be better now. Is that better? There you go. So yeah, I think the issue is that that NATO, Stoltenberg let the cat out of the bag. I think those are NATO pilots. I think you would not have adequate and sufficient number of trained Ukrainians. From sources I believe to be accurate, a lot of Ukrainian pilots were basically abandoning going to training. It's like, yeah, we're over here in the West now. We're not going back. So it's kind of like they've had problems all along in that. And I got to tell you, and I'll be interested. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm betting that was a Freudian slip that Stoltenberg wasn't supposed to let the cat out of the bag. That, yeah, those are NATO pilots flying the F-16s.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I was thinking too, just on a practical level. I mean, the idea that you can fly F-16s with people who don't even speak English that well. They had to be trained in English before they could even start the training for the pilots, so that they could understand how the instrumentation works and all that kind of stuff. And they were trained on like MiG-29s and other kinds of Soviet type aircraft.
Yeah, you got to unlearn that stuff. I mean, Danny,
see, that's what not people want to understand. Well, I want you to go down that path. When you say they have to unlearn that, what does that mean? Because to most people, they think an airplane's an airplane, so you just change this with that one. It's not that hard. What do you mean by unlearn?
Well, just let's go use a civilian example to begin with. So Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, has a certain philosophy of how they make airplanes, and that philosophy basically influences everything from the yoke to the power controls for the motors to the displays and how the systems work. And they believe that the pilot should always be in charge of the aircraft, period. Airbus has the exact opposite philosophy. They believe that the aircraft should be flying with minimum inputs from the pilot. So everything is automated. They have joysticks instead of yokes. That basically requires anyone flying civilian aircraft to be retrained from one platform to the other. So it happens in civilian life. Imagine, to your point, Danny, that you have people who have never spoken English, who came up through the Russian system. Remember, Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, so they had Soviet material, Soviet Russian built stuff. And as a matter of fact, Ukraine used to be one of the manufacturers of a lot of the Russian material. They have factories there. So the point being is that if you've come up as a pilot, or frankly, if you're an armor guy, I mean, you're an armored cav guy. I can't imagine you switching over from the M1s, M2s, all these fighting vehicles to use Russian gear, the T-80s or the BMPs.
Yeah, and you could even say like the British Leopard, for example. I'm sorry, the German Leopard. I mean, those top-notch tank. But if you switched me from an M1 to that one, I don't know anything. I have to figure out not just how to operate it, but how to fight with it, which is very different. Yeah, that's just
right. So that's the point. It's like you've got to basically unlearn what you've known for decades, and then pick up a new system. And some would say it's easier to train people with no background in aviation than someone who's had experience, because you've got to do a two-step thing. You got to untrain and then train. Someone coming in fresh, you don't have to worry about untraining because they have no bad habits or prior beliefs on how things should work.
But now let's look at the other part of that. Let's say the Stoltenberg did let the cat out of the bag, unintentionally, and that there are NATO pilots. Why would a NATO pilot want to get up in one of those things when, you're not talking about squadrons going in and fighting, air to air kind of thing.
Like
you're talking about, you're talking about a lot of air defense weapons up against a handful of F-16s, all of which are going to be looking for you. I'm not sure I want to get in that cockpit.
No, I wouldn't either. So the Russians have a bounty on these things too. So they want to knock them down. So I think that's why they're going to keep them, at least for now, away from the front line where the Russians could get at them directly. This is more symbolic, Danny, than anything else. This is another Wonder weapon is supposed to make us think that somehow this is going to be the one next thing that finally tips the balance in favor of Ukraine and is going to defeat Putin. And between you and me, I can't believe Putin hasn't already surrendered and just turned over all of Russia to Ukraine at this point, based on the 6 F-16s that showed up. But that's what they're counting on. Yeah, it's insane. It's not rational. To your point, this goes back to our national security policy. It's not rational. It's not based on fact. It's not based on strategy. It's based on an equation that is focused on how do we get people to talk to each other and work more effectively together. It's all about creating the perception of unity and of a strong alliance rather than having unity and a strong alliance. And that's what Biden keeps talking about. Oh, he's rebuilt NATO. No,
you can fool people in the West, the United States, in Germany, France, etc. You can fool them with that interpretation and impression, but when it comes to actually war fighting, that's just not going to work. Now, there was a little bit of realism that snuck into Zelensky here because he had this, this big, like they always do. They have a high polished media campaign where they had the camera tilting and moving and dramatic music and a bunch of stuff to show Zelensky in front of these F-16s. But he had a moment of, frankly, a little honesty in what he talked about the F-16s. Watch this.
У відповідь слово це неможливо, але все ж ми зробили можливим те, що було нашою амбіцією, нашою оборонною потребою. А тепер це дійсно реальність у нашому небі. F-16 в Україні. Яка кількість, поки що та кількість, яка є в Україні, поки що та кількість пілотів, які вже навчені, цього ще недостатньо. Позитив є в тому, що ми очікуємо додаткових F-16. Позитив є в тому, що наші хлопці зараз, багато хлопців зараз навчаються.
Now, you admit that you don't have enough, and when you're positive, first of all, he did the standard Western/NATO thing of talking about, we turn the impossible to the possible, and now it's become reality. Well, I mean, we only have a handful of these things, and we're training guys, though. We're still training people, and so that's a positive. So it's other than the display on the tarmac here, I don't know what these things are going to do, even in the near term.
Well, again, I think they're defensive weapons that are meant to knock down drones and missiles. That's it. Now, I don't take this the wrong way. I'm an admirer of the F-16. This is part of John Boyd's. John Boyd was a brilliant colonel who came up with a lot of effective weapon systems. The A-10 was one of his ideas. The F-15, which is still flying, they just did the F-15EX. These are amazing platforms. With that said, a handful of anything ain't going to make a determining factor in any great conflict. And in this case, as much as I think the F-16 is an amazing dogfighter, has pretty good traits as a ground attack aircraft, these things are outclassed by the current generation of Russian fighters. And Danny, again, I don't know how effective they're going to be in knocking down drones, knocking down missiles, which is their primary purpose. So again, it's all symbology. Zelensky kind of admitted that there's not really much here. But it has not stopped them from trying to create a perception that somehow this is going to be that next big thing, the thing that's going to finally tip the scales on the battlefield. It ain't even close.
And look, here's this report that was out a couple of days ago, also talking about the fact that, really to your point, they're not going to be on the front line. Watch this.
Zelensky spoke about the jets during a special Armed Forces Day event. The jets, decorated with Ukraine symbols, were on display, and 2 flew overhead as he spoke. Zelensky says they will help protect Ukraine's skies from Russian missiles and aircraft. However, they won't be near the front lines as there are too few of them and too much Russian defense systems that can shoot them down.
So it's good enough for every Gary. If the things can't go to the front line, which is where the war is being won and lost,
right,
on a lot of combat contact. So if you can go from way in the back, and maybe this is why some NATO pilots might be willing to fly if they get a lot of money, I would imagine. They want to be as far out of contact as possible, but they got to be at least close enough to where that they can engage any of these incoming missiles. And it's still going to be kind of hard. But tell me if I'm wrong or not. But if you're close enough in an F-16 to be able to engage or intercept any missiles or drones, you're also going to be close enough to some of the countermeasures of the Russian side to take the aircraft down. Is that right?
I agree with your assessment. I don't know if they really understand what that means. I mean, I think they've deployed these things in a strategy of hope. They've not actually done the overlays. Come on, I as an intelligence guy, we do overlays. We look at things which overlap and where the air defense artillery's at, and terrain features and urban areas, and you put it all together to understand what resources you have that can do certain missions within the context of that battle space. And I don't think they've done that. I don't think they wanted to do that, Danny. I think this is all just trying to get something in that looks sexy, that they can use for propaganda purposes. Heck, I think Zelensky would be better off putting this in at the airport in Kiev and basically renting it out so kids can take $25 joy rides on it, so at least they can make some money off of it.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how far that's going to work, and I mean that might be a better use of them from what they're going to get, and I think that there's going to be a lot of disappointment in that. But I want to kind of shift gears back to really the ramifications of this in terms of the war. If F-16s were hoped at some point to be a decisive impact and to change the course of the war, they're obviously going to be disappointed on that. But what are they looking at on the war? So back during the NATO summit in Washington in July last month, there was lots of talk about what's going to happen with the election. Now, at that time, Biden was still the nominee on the Democratic side, and Trump was in the news for talking about how he was already wanting to get this thing wrapped up in a negotiated settlement. And if he wins, then he's going to even have the thing negotiated before he gets in office. I don't know how he's going to do that, but that's the point. And so Zelensky came out during that time and was saying, hey, listen, don't wait till November to find out who's going to be the president of the United States, because so many people in the West are hedging on this. They're saying, hey, what if Trump wins? I don't want to be giving a bunch of stuff away to Biden, the current administration, if he's not going to be there after January. And Zelensky was saying everyone is waiting for November, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, as the 2024 U.S. presidential election and the specter of a second Donald Trump presidency remains at the top. It's time to step out of the shadows, to make strong decisions work, and to act, not to wait until November is another month. So he was telling everybody, don't pay attention to what's going on out here. Now, that's in his self-interest naturally, but of course, why would any nation, especially in the West, not hedge given the uncertainties?
Well, again, I think that the trajectory of Western support is diminishing, period. I don't think NATO, they were trying to get this permanent fund set up in NATO to fund this thing indefinitely. And NATO nations said, yeah, no, thanks. And then I think members of Congress, if they come back for more money now, are going to say, yeah, we gave you a bunch and you did nothing with it. I think the reality is that the war is going to end either through a compromise and negotiations or complete failure and collapse of the Ukrainian system. That's it. That's it, Danny. I've said from day one, we've talked about this from day one, without outside troops, without outside resources, Ukraine would never prevail. I said that within the first 3 months of the conflict when it started. It has not changed. So at this point, they've done all sorts of different gimmicks. They've done gimmicks of the new missiles, of the Patriots, of the ATACMS. They've gone through all the different machinations of different things that were going to be the next big thing that helped them win. And we always said it's not going to work, and it hasn't worked. So they're now left with two options. Either you capitulate, incidental to the complete collapse of your country, or you start negotiating. That's it. Those are the only two choices. And I think Trump's going to nudge them into the negotiation thing before November. Because I don't think Kamala, I'll be blunt, Kamala does not have the intelligence to understand how to affect anything going on. My judgment is this administration has the clown car of freedom that they're trying to promote, and they are now passengers in their own clown car at this point. They have no influence.
Well, I mean, it's been evident from the beginning that the administration, whether it's the president or Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, don't seem to have a grasp of the reality of modern combat and how
They
wars
don't.
even work, as evidenced by the comments that they keep making in the absence of paying attention to anything that happens on the battlefield. But so that was Zelensky in July saying, "Don't wait till November. Give us the stuff now." Well, since a lot of that stuff didn't happen, now then he's saying,
Exactly.
let's wait for November. So now all of a sudden he's saying maybe we should have a negotiated, instead of this ridiculous, you talk about clown car, this so-called peace summit they had in Switzerland where they didn't invite Russia and they're trying to make it look like they're going to have some end to the war that doesn't include one of the partners, which was insane because you can't have anything without both partners there. Well, now then he's going to allow Russia to come to this negotiating table. And we're going to look at just a second on what the Russians think about this. But just on the surface of it there, I mean, it looks like maybe a little realism is creeping into Zelensky.
As I said, Denny, collapse or negotiation. That's it. That's all they got left. The well is running dry. They cannot keep coming back asking us, the Europeans, for money, because even the Europeans now are wise to the fact that this is all a scam. And I don't think it's going anywhere. So I think he's seen the writing on the wall, especially if Trump comes in. There's not going to be any more of these multi-billion-dollar, oh, just take the money and let us know if you need more. That's going to end. I think Zelensky knows that.
And then when you look at what's going on the battlefield, I mean, that tells people what they should know. I mean, not that this hadn't been out there for a long time, but when you have even the Washington Post, it's running headlines like this one here just a week or so ago: Russia adapting tactics, advances in Donetsk, and takes more Ukrainian land. And this is one of many. New York Times is doing the same thing. So it's now even starting to get into the Western media, which heretofore had basically just been cheerleading everything and ignoring all the failures, et cetera. Now, all of a sudden, you're starting to see a more and more movement towards realistic recognition of what's going on the ground. Now, that leads us to the other half of that equation. If Zelensky is very graciously going to allow Russia to join this next peace summit sometime in November, one would say, well, what is the Russian position here? So Lavrov a few days ago was actually at a press conference, actually in New York at the United Nations, and was asked about the Russian willingness to negotiate. He said this.
Once again, we are willing to engage in talks, but given the deplorable experience of our previous talks with the Ukrainians and with the West, an agreement which I hope is going to be achieved at a certain point in time, an agreement on European security, and if it provides a basis for settling the Ukrainian crisis, then we're going to be very careful when we analyze that document, and we'll do everything in our power to include clauses which will prevent illegitimate or malicious interpretations from being implemented. Thank you.
Now, I think what he was referring to there is something that Putin has said many times, in that they say that, frankly, they just don't trust the United States anymore. They don't trust the West, Europe, because especially after the debacle of the Minsk agreements in 2015, 2016, where Western leaders later admitted themselves that they never intended it to be implemented. They just wanted to buy time for Ukraine to rearm, et cetera.
Right.
So how is that going to roll into here? So Russia is clearly in the driver's seat now militarily, and I think diplomatically. So how would you see any kind of negotiations going on now? What would Russia have to even accept a negotiated settlement, as opposed to the second version you mentioned, which is an outright military victory?
So, well, one administrative thing I want to say before I answer the question. There's been very consistent factual information from you, from Doug McGregor, from Blaine Holt and I. We have been very consistent saying you've been lied to by the U.S. media. The U.S. media now, Danny, is finally easing up to the reality which we have seen for the last 18 months. So that's notable. Now, to answer the question directly that you're asking regarding the potential for this moving forward, the more the Russians see the U.S. media becoming more truthful, I think the more they will be apt to kind of reopen the door, because I think they will at least look at having a contact with us. especially if Trump comes in. And this is where I think Trump does have leverage. If he wins on the 5th of November, on the 6th of November, the Russians are going to come knocking. They are. I know this. I don't know this for a fact. I'm not involved, but I'm saying I know how things work. And that's what will happen. So the Russians would engage on, I believe that the basis would be Istanbul Agreement plus the one that they almost had signed at the beginning of the war. That would be the basis for the new talks. And I think it would be worked out pretty quick.
So now I've heard some pro-Russian sources argue that Russia will not settle for anything less than possibly not just the full Donbass, which they still don't have, which is what Putin asked for on, I think, the 6th of June, when he said one more time, here's what I'm willing to sacrifice for. As long as y'all give us all of this and move out of those territories, then we can have a negotiated settlement. Now then they're saying, because that wasn't accepted, that was kind of like his last ultimatum, which he didn't expect to be accepted, but he still had to put it out there publicly. Now then they're saying that the minimum that Russia would accept would be taking Odessa and therefore all of the Black Sea coast and Kharkiv at a minimum. What do you think of that?
That's a negotiating position. Again, I can't speak for the Trump campaign or President Trump, but that's a negotiating position. You always carve out what you want before you start seriously talking about what you're willing to take. So that's a negotiating position. I'm confident that things can be worked out.
And looking at it from the Russian perspective, and you may not be able to answer this, but just what is your best guess as to what would satisfy Putin's security requirements, since that's what drove him to launch this operation in the beginning, because of his unwillingness to allow NATO to come into Ukraine. What is his territorial acquisitions going to be to give him security on his flank?
That's an excellent question. So you and I have spoken about this a number of times, both on this platform and my platform. Putin reflects the fundamental paranoia that comes from Russia having been invaded going back before it was Russia. And so if you can sit down and give assurances in the form of treaties or agreements which the Russians feel comfortable with, then I don't think you're going to see an aggressive Russia. I just don't. I think Putin wants to make money. He's a business guy now. You know, they're a republic. They want to sell oil and be prosperous. Imagine that. And so I think at this point, if there could be assurances from NATO saying NATO will no longer move east, which, by the way, James Baker, Secretary Baker, promised in, what was it, 94, 90, I forget when it was, but it was in the early 90s that we promised after Ukraine became independent, NATO would not move east, and it did. So if you can find a way to say, okay, look, we're going to reform NATO, we're going to turn it into something that maybe even Russia can join. Imagine that, Danny. What if Russia joined NATO? Would that maybe back them off and say, no, because you've got the same requirements of Article 5, right? You can't have NATO attacking Russia if they're an Article 5 nation. Am I correct on that?
Theoretically.
There you go. So what's wrong with that? If you want to really detune the potential for war, then put everybody together and make sure that they have a security arrangements which actually facilitate their feeling comfortable and working to establish business relationships rather than military relationships.
Yeah,
I'm telling you right now, the globalists don't want it. The globalists don't want it.
Yeah, the globalists don't want it. The billions of people around the world do, because they likewise, they just want to live. They just want to have a lot. They want to do business. Right. They want to engage. They want to travel. They want to do all that stuff without having to worry about whether they're going to get shot, going across any border or not.
Exactly.
So I certainly know that's for me. But in the last few minutes we have here, I want to look at what is the alternative to that, because that is the priority objective for humanity, for people, right, for normal human beings. Yeah. That's what we should be seeking for. And that is what is definitely available with just a marginal amount of diplomatic willingness to find that out.
Exactly.
But here's where we're at. We're at a problem where there are people who are not willing to be reasonable. And we have too many warmongers in Washington, whether in office or in positions of influence, wants to go in a different direction. Now, we have the administration recently announced that we're going to be in a process of putting mid-range weapons that are nuclear capable in
INF,
Germany.
Intermediate nuclear weapons, right? Yeah,
Right.
I think
And
it's
so
unwise.
now there's no need for that. There's no purpose for that other than to say, hey, we want to stick our face in Russia's, or our finger in
Right.
Russia's face. Here's the problem. Russia has countermeasures. Here's what Vladimir Putin said just a little while ago.
If the United States implement such plans, we will consider ourselves free from the previously assumed unilateral moratorium on the deployment of medium and shorter range strike weapons, including increasing the capabilities of the coastal forces of our Navy.
So he elsewhere used the term mirror. Well, whatever you guys do, we're going to do the same thing. You have these weapons, we're going to have them. Concurrently, you have Putin also saying, hey, because you've already given, speaking of mirror, you've already given Ukraine weapons and authorization to fire into Russian territory. So I'm going to mirror that, and I'm going to give our weapons to potentially some of your adversaries, one of which could be Iran. So, with all this stuff going on within the Iranian and the Middle Eastern issue with Israel and that whole region that's, almost on fire already, it's possible that our interest could be harmed further if Russia makes good on some of those threats here. So to what extent, now I've had people on this show that says there's a lot of things that the Russians will just be deceitful on, and they'll say this and they really mean this, but there's one thing they don't bluff on, and that's on security issues. And where do you fall on, is Putin bluffing when he says he might give our weapons or his weapons to our adversaries? And is he bluffing on these nuclear weapon deployments?
No, he's not bluffing. And I think he's correct in presuming that it's a bad idea. I was part of a team that helped oversee our dismantling of our INF, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, during the late 80s, 88, 89, 90. I actually witnessed, I went to Marshall, Texas. We got rid of the Pershing 2 boosters, and Russians were there to watch. We eliminated a whole class of nuclear weapons. I think that was a good idea. I'm a Reagan guy. I was there. We should stick with that. Anybody who wants to understand what could go wrong, read War Scare, 1983, Russia and America on the brink of nuclear war. Exactly what Putin's saying. If we start deploying these new tactical nuclear weapons, we will go back to the conditions which almost resulted in a nuclear exchange in the 1980s. It is unwise. It is stupid. There's no reason to redeploy nuclear weapons that we got rid of. Only people who are seeking war would seek to redeploy tactical nuclear weapons, which by miscalculation almost resulted in nuclear war. I highly recommend this. My friend, Dr. Peter Pry, he died last year. God rest his soul. This talks about what happened when you have people miscalculating intentions. We don't want to go there. And so we have to take this very seriously, Danny. I'm not a dove, but I most certainly am not a hawk that wants to see war that we get in the middle of without understanding how we got there and how to get out of it. And that's what this administration is doing by trying to, oh yeah, we'll just do this. We'll throw this at the wall and see what sticks. It's very dangerous, counterproductive, and will only make the globe more unstable.
Okay, so and I said that was the last thing. One more thing that's related to this. Just wondered, if you can, as far as you know anyway, why would the administration, this current administration, take us down a path that rational people, anyone with a willingness to just look at the fundamentals on a table, can easily say, this is a stupid path to go down. There is no possible upside here. We can't win. We can't get anything positive. So instead of risking potential nuclear war or any even conventional war with Russia, let's just, cut the losses here. Let's get this thing ended and let's just move on to something else. Keep everything that we have. We have all of our NATO, everything's fine. And we'll just move on from there, instead of continuing to push something that can't succeed. You said a minute ago, well, the globalists would be against that. When you say that, what does that mean? And I'm talking about like the people at the top, whether it's Austin, Biden, I almost said Netanyahu. I guess he might qualify for that. But Blinken, et cetera, the key players, Jake Sullivan, what would prompt them and influence them to make decisions for the United States that are antithetical to our interests?
Because there is a globalist movement, Danny, that wants to have the conflict because they prosper during conflict. They believe that politically that a world conflict benefits them to actually use that as a vector to insinuate their policies. They did it during COVID. They would do it during war. It's very dangerous. And it's something that we have to be aware of. They're not trying to do anything to actually help the Ukrainian people or bring peace. It's the opposite. And I ask people to look at this for what it is, not what they want it to be. And I've said that we have the high school debating team in charge. Yes, we do. We have people who are that stupid and naive, but they are being led by others who know exactly what they're doing, making decisions which are fundamentally evil and would create conditions for war to start. That's what's going on. And you know who these people are: Hillary Clinton, oh my goodness, Jake Sullivan, Barack Obama. These folks are warmongers. They want war. They desire nothing more than conflict to help them, what they believe will help them leverage their political future. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of this stuff is in the shadows, and probably for a reason. But what we can see very clearly is the influence that whoever it is that has, because I just can't think that all these otherwise intelligent people would not see that the futility of what they're doing here. But that's
Daddy, they don't come talk to us, do they? They don't want to hear anything regarding practical advice based on experience and understanding of circumstance. So
stuff that could benefit our country, that could benefit Europe, that could benefit the Ukrainians, for God's sake, if only sane policies would have been put into place a lot longer. But whatever, we have what we have, and we have to deal with that. But that's why, at least so far, America still has the ability, the people, to influence the course at the ballot box. So let's hope that we can take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, Denny, I got to go. I got to do another interview.
All right, man.
Good
See you next time. Thank you very much.
Take care.
And by the way, folks, we've got another really good lineup tomorrow. We have Larry Johnson back tomorrow. We have the ever popular John Mearsheimer on tomorrow. Folks, you're not going to want to miss this. They're able to provide some kind of clarity that just very few other people have, and that's one of the reasons we're very grateful for having them on our show here, just like we did Tony Shaffer. So thank you very much. Again, please do like and subscribe, share this with your friends so that they get access to the same kind of truth that you do. And we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.